Wholeness, this is Josh of integratingpresence.com, and today I'm sitting down with Randy Green, and that's spelled with an I. And so I've been following Randy's work probably maybe around 2015 and longer, the public stuff on YouTube, and it wasn't here with maybe in the last couple years or so that I've started doing the progression work courses on her site, and the site name is it's in Danish, right? The website name. Yeah. How does it? Before we jump into that or whatever, because I would probably mispronounce it, right? If I remember right, it means double awareness, though.
Yes.
And, what we're here today, though, is to talk, mention specifically a brand new video that came out on yesterday, actually, when we're recording this. So the video is January 28th, 2023, just for the timeline here. And it's called New Inner Domain Races and New Intervention Protocol. And it's from the HOSE New Reality Challenges Updates 2023. And so we'll get into more of that. But before we do that, I wanted to just kind of give like an intro of Randy's work and allow her to introduce herself. Before I do that even, I just wanted to say how I was drawn. Well, actually, let's do that because I've talked enough to begin with. So how would you introduce yourself to people on YouTube? Now, I would say you can go to her YouTube channel, and she's done this so many different times already. So we can keep it brief and point people to your YouTube channel. But I mean, for the sake of this little recording here, what would you say?
Well, first and foremost, thank you for being here. So I'm grateful that I can be here on your Integrating Presence podcast forum, where you are interviewing different people, trying to get the message out there, trying to get the information out there, because we are living in difficult times, as we all know. But that's not new in the long run of history and humanity. Introducing myself, don't really know where to start, don't really know what to say, but I've been on YouTube since 2013, where I began my work, and I have studied the esoteric teachings for many years. I have a background as a psychotherapist. I am a licensed psychotherapist. I've been working with clients since 2007. I'm also a licensed healer and I'm a clairvoyant. And that's kind of where I began my work. But before that, I was in the corporate world, big business, as many, and decided to leave that because that was not my niche. But I worked my way through the everyday life-based program and decided to change. And by that, went into healing and psychotherapy. And with that work, discovered that, there's so much more to it than what meets the eye and what meets the normal perception level. And as I was working with my clients, tailoring my own type of psychotherapy, aside from what I've been, the education within existential psychotherapy, the meaning of life, the big context, trying to figure out why do we human do what we do, why are we here, why do we exist?
The big questions. Which also led to, in 2010, between 2010 and 2013, I did my bachelor degree in theology, not because I'm religious, but because I wanted to study the sciences behind religions, the sciences behind theology, and that's the Christian perception of reality. But I have other interests and self-studies done within Buddhism and Hinduism and esoteric teaching systems, and more or less everything I could get my hands and my fingers into, which I've been doing since I was 22. Asking the big questions. So some of it is what we call within the formal education system, and I have a huge amount of knowledge that I kind of dug into on my own merits, as well as with the work with my clients and what surfaced there. Because as I work with my clients, the deeper I got into the layers of what constitutes a human, what is a human, what does it mean to be a human. And then also having that weird curiosity where I kind of explored beyond what was put out there, having that inner knowledge, there's more to this. This is not all there is. This is not just what has been put up there. There is more to this reality than what we are being told. And that's a foundational feeling I have. It's a gut feeling. So that led me down several rabbit holes. as so many other seekers. But the difference is here that I have this, as I grew more and more into learning to investigate things, information came up from within. People call it inner knowledge, but it was more extensive than that. It was also techniques. It was how to do this. For instance, when I began working with the chakra system, I knew per intuition how to work in what we call very deep esoteric ways that are not put into text material. It's not put out there. But when I, for instance, studied the Bailey material, the Alice A. Bailey material, I found the hidden doors behind the obvious information. And I remember when I was 18 and I went to Israel, I met a young guy down there who I was having this very philosophical conversation with. He was a brother of one of my friends, and we were having this conversation. And I talked to him about my intuitive understanding of the Hebrew Bible, and he said, yeah, that's because there are 3 levels of all studies. There's the literal one where you work with what's verbatim, what's out there, and people take that as that's the scripture, that's the literal interpretation. Yes, God created the world in 7 days, and onward and so forth. And then there's the religious one where you practice that in the synagogue or in the temples or in the church. That is made in a specific way from the priesthood class that are teaching that level. And then there's the esoteric, the hidden, the mystery, the mystic level, where you have visions, where you work with the expanded perception of what you're studying, and you get into these whole contemplative or meditative states of awareness where you work with the information on what we could call a really advanced level of complex information systems. And once you nail that one, then it just kind of opens up a lot of other doors of teachings.
Yeah, and I hear this time and time again with seekers, similar type things. But what what takes your information and to the next level, and you've only just a little bit hinted at it. I mean, if people are not familiar with their work, I would just say they have no idea the levels and depth of your material. And so what I've noticed about some unique material that I've found is the terminology. You have your own unique terminology. And one of the ways I find this is helpful is that when we hear one term, we immediately think we know what it is, and we don't have to kind of investigate it or look at it any different anymore. So just giving that its own name, but it's not only that, it's not like you're just copying and pasting and putting a different label on it. No, it's much more than that. And there's also your own high level of conveying and interpreting these other systems too. Like you've gone in and you mentioned some of the Galantics and Guardian teaching systems that people can look these up for their own. And even just other people that are reporting what's now known as galactic history, right? There's certain things that match up from those systems, but you see them in other ways too, right? Or there's key pieces that are missing. And maybe not to throw too much out here, but in this idea of an agenda. So we all have an agenda, right? And so those teaching systems, they have their own agenda and their own abilities of how they view that material and why they're conveying it the way they are. And so the things you bring to this is your own unique high level thing that just sheds so much light. And I guess knowledge that it's hard to find very few places, if anywhere at all, right? And it goes into these things that some groups would call gridworking, right? And missions and programs. And then the big thing too is exopolitics, which basically means, you have geopolitics, which means the world. So that would mean beyond the world, politics beyond just the known regular world as well. Yeah.
Yeah. The exopolitics, I think it's actually Michael Sala that came up with that one as kind of alluding to what's the politics amongst the extraterrestrial races that are present in our reality field. The reason why I decided let me do a little bit of kind of framework on this one,
sure.
Why I created my own language, if that's okay.
Sure.
While I was doing, yes?
Well, before when we talk about the other races in a reality field, now we're not just talking about little gray men that, I can't, unless they materialize beside me, then that's just for people that are unfamiliar with all that. We're not talking about something that's necessarily 3D that we can go up and touch, right? All the time. So just it should be given, right? But sometimes people think, that means a gray man. And so,
yes.
okay.
Yes, well, I would be more than happy to have kind of little grey man landing in my backyard and
Right.
coming for a cup of coffee. That would be nice. I would enjoy that. But that's not how these folks operate. So let me. There are two questions here. There's one with the whole extraterrestrial level and the understanding of that level, and then there's the why the new terminology. Why not just use what everybody else has been using? And that's because when you work, as we talked about, the 3 layers of information that's out there, the one that's with what I call the base program, everyday life, literal interpretation, tangible, matter-oriented. This is what we can touch and feel and sense with our 5 senses. Then there's the religious or the spiritual part that kind of goes with the understanding of the soul. So that's another level of information. And then you have the very high level that actually goes with your individual energy system. And yes, I know I'm here throwing in a lot of concepts. And that's what when most people work with my information, the ones I am trying to get hold of, so to speak, the ones my target group, to use that word, are the ones that have been studying this for a very, very long time and have discovered, like everybody else, it's like going into a rabbit hole, it leads nowhere. It's just this kind of like the 5-year-old child, you ask why, and it just ends up in nowhere. And one of the reasons why is, and I don't want to, the whys, why I want to go into that why, the answer that's part of my first 6 books, I try to say, well, we have got this kind of understanding of realities and enclosure, colonization, ancient civilizations, ancient races that have been here as long as humanity has been here. And there's so much more to that, but I don't want to go down that path here. But the idea of creating a new language is because you have the different layers of perception. And when we work within the everyday reality, we use the language we have created together as a species, where we could say, well, English is a common language. In the old days, it was French, and then it was German, and you can say other parts of the world is Chinese, and onward and so forth. So this is not about biased lingual what we call choices as a kind of, I prefer English over anything else. But English goes back to Latin, and that was the church language. So we go down path with language.
Sure.
Why is language important? It's a spell. You spell something. It's connected to energy. It's connected to containers of information. It's connected to a specific way the neural network works. So words are important. Words are not just something you throw here and there, which the ancient civilizations knew, which is why they had the secret language of the church or the temple or the synagogue. That's part of the secret teachings. The priesthood teachings had their own languages. And then you have, of course, the higher language that goes with your energy system, that goes into what we call biocodes, that goes into light language, that goes with your emotional field, that goes into what we call mental level or the radiation field, that goes with what we call flame letters. And that goes into different reality fields. That flame letters go with radiation level, light language goes with vibrational level, and onward and so forth.
And this is explained in more detail in the video I mentioned that we'll come to in a little bit here.
Yes. So there is so much more layer to what people just think, oh, I just thought a thought. No, actually a thought is a word. It's part of an emotional context. It's part of a psychological structure. It's part of who we identify ourselves with. It's about the narrative we create around ourselves. This is common psychology. It's about the cognitive schemes we have where we perceive reality. So words are very important, and they link up to what's called thought forms in the collective fields of humanity. So when I choose to create new words, it is with that understanding in mind, so that I'm kind of saying to people, well, we have had 2,500 or 3,000 years of teachings, but humanity is now moving into something that is so entirely and uniquely new. And no, it's not the age of Aquarius, but we are moving into something that's so uniquely new that will lead to a new type of disclosure, that will lead to a new type of perception, that will lead to new sciences and new ways of perceiving who and what we are as humans. And if we are to bridge, that's where I began actually, that kind of, I got that task of try to bridge science to the spiritual teaching systems. That's why I began with the whole spiritual teaching, studying the Bible, studying everything, get my hands on what are these spiritual teaching systems, what's the thought forms behind, what's the purpose of these spiritual teaching systems, what energy system is connected to these spiritual teaching systems. And then going and say, well, then we have, if we do the chakra system, which you, for those who are interested, I made a little podcast series on my higher order energetic systemic awareness forum YouTube channel. I know it's a very long word there, but
to be linked in the show notes.
Yes, exactly. So there I've done my little chakra teaching series where I explain these things, as well as my take on Buddhism that is on the Whole Academy YouTube channel. So I put that one in there as well, so people can kind of get, okay, how do I work with these old teaching systems, and why do I want to break them down and to say it as it is, to get rid of them and do something new? Because we are in the 21st century. We are humans today with a higher order level, scientific level, not higher order in my perception of things, but compared to the ancient civilizations, there everything was infused with spirituality or religion or the king, or it were under different types of powers or extraterrestrial powers, actually, because that is my general understanding of this reality. We have humanity, we have the ones that are in between. Back then it was the priestly lineages, today we call them the elite, and onward and so forth, and that levels up, always connects to some kind of extraterrestrial presence that's been here as long as we have existed. Because, as the Galactic also states, well, we are part of these civilizations. We used to be part of these civilizations. But where the Galactics and other systems work with what we call the humanoid races, the stellar races, I'm working with the original civilizations of our solar system, that we belonged here as an advanced civilization, that were not what we call stellar. That stellar means it comes from other systems, other adjacent realities in fourth and fifth and sixth dimension, what have you. We have 9 dimensions in our reality field as well. We can go up to 12, but right now we only activated 9 of them, and that's technically as far as we got when Atlantis collapsed. But again, going in there saying, well, Atlantis was a humanoid colony. Okay, when was the last time the solar system races had their own colonies? And that's my perception, Lemuria, that goes so far back that it's outside of any known records, not even what the esoterics claim to know of. So again, I differ all the time. I use the same words, but every time I kind of go in there, well then, my inner knowledge just expands into deeper and deeper and deeper and further back, almost to the origin of this universal structure. So,
in everything Randy's talking about here, she mentions some in her free material, and then also in her courses online as well. Now, this notion of studying these past systems in order to bridge, from them, because they're so, I guess, embedded, not maybe as much as they once were, obviously, but they're still there, and using them to leave them, basically cross the bridge, go over, and then get to what where you were talking about as well. Yeah, I find that, because just to write them all off without explanation, I think would be maybe a little bit premature, but at the same time, knowing why they ought to be, moved on from, right? And this notion of taking science, what we know, quote unquote science, and bringing that to what people call spirituality. Now, this is something people talk about, spiritual science, but what you're talking about is a little bit different than this. But this is kind of what more people are putting more credibility into, just regular base program thing, putting more credibility into science than they are religion, right? But there's things to be taking that are quote unquote more spiritual or religious, but then applying more scientific means to them, right? There's a few groups doing this, but again, your unique take on it and going higher order, yes, to these kind of things.
Actually, it's not. It is unique. The way I do is my unique method of it. But if you do the Galactics as well as also the esoteric, the Alice Bale material. The theosophical community that grew out of Blavatsky material, not Blavatsky, but Bailey.
Yes.
She is what I call Syrian A, where I kind of say that the Galactics was Syrian B, so they're from the same system. And the Syrian system are, when we talk about humanoid races, they are scientific, and that's why I want to bridge it into science, and that's why I call it high order science and not human sciences. But they already did that. If you study the Bailey material, you will see they tried to use the sciences of the time in the early 1900s and try and merge it there, which did not go so well.
And at the same time, not making people that were religious-minded, upsetting them and using that context.
So they were still having the religious context, and then they merged in science, but they did it in a clairvoyant way and tried to create the what we call the ageless wisdom, which is kind of spiritual science. Yeah. So they tried to bridge in there, and there was Annie Besant who did this kind of clairvoyant, looking at the atom and looking into what was they made of. And I looked into this material, and she was on the right track. But what she saw, in my perception, and I could be wrong, but the way I perceived what she saw was very what I would call distorted or astral. Mm-hmm. It was, she looked into it, but she didn't really look into it. Well, what would then be the next step? And that would go from the astral perception of seeing it as we are. Let me explain what I mean with the astral. If you go into the forest, for instance, you go and you see a tree, you will definitely, I do that too. I've been working with tree spirits, nature spirits, all these kind of astral entities, which I, again, have another deeper level take on, but that's the first level we work with, because everything's in levels. So when I go into the wood, I would see the tree and I work with the tree spirit. I will not look at what science tells me the Latin name is of it. Because
this is more on an emotional level, right?
It's an astral level. I kind of clairvoyant astral level. I look at it clairvoyantly, which is astral plane perception. And then I work with the spirit that's there, the entity that has created itself out of the astral energies. But I can go further back then. If I look constantly, go further back in the tree, not only kind of breaking it down to its atoms, go into the quantum fields, what have you, but go beyond the quantum barrier. Then I will actually step into the original Pleiadian transformative sciences of why a reality was even created, just by working with that tree and just going deeper and deeper and deeper. And that's the higher order sciences, where you go beyond what they, in the early esoteric teachings, they work with the astral plane. They wanted to get to the mental plane. And that's where the Bailey material tried to bridge that. And if you want to say, well, if we look at this as a kind of a line of different teaching systems, well, then you had the Bailey material that were clearing out the distortion, the glamour, trying to get people up to the mental level. They made that material for that bridge. And then the Kalontics and that line, I know the Kalontics will not agree on that, but then you could say that's where things get into the mental level, because in the mental you go into the stellar awareness. So that's the next step of that one.
And it's interesting too, you've called the astral level the distortion field, right? It's a distortion plane, these things, which most people don't think like, because it's some of it was set up as another trap a lot of times, right? That folks think, well, once I get to the astral, then I've arrived. Once I can just get there, that's the end all be all. But you're saying, and others are, that's actually a lot of that's distorted material based on our distorted emotions sometimes can influence that. And at the same time, it's still linked, right? Because of the interconnectivity, it can link into what you were talking about there when you go as deep and far as you've gone, right?
Yes. We could say, if we talk about the origin of the astral plane, we could say, well, in a human energy system, you have the emotional field, that's part of the psyche, and you work into your subconscious, that's where psychology comes in. Then you work your way through past lives, and once you go beyond the past life, as the Bailey or the esoterics called, because not just Bailey, there were other people, Dion Fortune, there was a lot of people working at that time, they call it the guardian of the threshold, where you actually meet your own inner demon, quote unquote, the dark night of the soul, where you look at that barrier you have built up yourself to keep yourself in the comfort zone of everyday life. And once you go beyond that, that's typically after your past lives, you go into what I call the artificial fourth dimension. That's where you get all of the greys and all the insectoids and all of these kind of extraterrestrial beings that have colonized our world. And then you go beyond that. So you can always go further and further. That's expanded awareness, where you keep following the trail and not just take for granted what's there. But the astral plane itself, as a kind of, it's linked to the emotional field. And that's why many people, once they get into that level of working with what we call sensations of bliss or gratitude or these higher level emotion, compassion, they are the bridge between the emotional field of selfish orientation and going into what we call the light field. But the astral plane or the distortion plane originally were that light field. where we would have got these feelings of being more in wholeness, to use your expression, with all living beings. That's part of that. We're part of that light field that we're astral. Astral is Latin and means light.
Yes.
So it was part of that level to begin with. But during the time of Atlantis, it got highly contaminated due to all sorts of shenanigans that the Atlanteans did. And by that light field got contaminated off part of the fourth dimension, which is why the extraterrestrials that are here have created their own artificial fourth, because the original fourth is so distorted, but it's linked to us. And that's the astral plane. And that's why when we go in meditation, contemplation, work with our energy system and our heart field, we have these glimpses of bliss and gratitude and compassion that are valid because they're part of the original, what I call the Kali Ka code, where we reconnected due to some ancient wars we had in the previous cycles, and we redid everything. Anyways, that's another story. But that was all destroyed by the Atlanteans and led to the fall of Atlantis. But that did not take away the residuals that are now part of the collective, which is the astral plane. Hence, so much distortion, hence so many entities, hence so many different golems and shells and ghosts and
fairies.
What have you. They were all part of some of these, I call them critters, that are the residual effect of a lot of these stupidities that unfolded during the times of Atlantis. So Atlantis, in many ways, I know many people want to talk about, oh, this was the heyday of whatever. It was of the humanoid races. It had a different purpose, but it technically led to the downfall of our entire reality field.
So it's wild, just staying on the astral, people have these experiences, right? And they don't really, a lot of times they don't have a context, or they have these watered down context of it, or they just come across one thing and then they think that, oh, that's it. And so this is what's nice about adding all this other stuff. And this is all to be investigated for ourselves. What helps with Randy's work here is it kind of, I don't know, maybe it jumpstarts or gives extra context that, maybe it might have taken me years and maybe even lifetimes to arrive at that point where then that can just fall on my plate, and then I can check that out for myself, and then compare it to other systems until I'm able to see and know this for myself on my own, right? And then we even talk about the astral barrier, and that's been lifted too. But yeah, you might want to say a little bit about that or wrap up, but then I want to get into the this specific new video.
Yeah. How do you go from there to there, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, from that level to the next level. So what I want to put in here is that, yes, definitely, I work my way through all of these layers. That's why I know of it. That's the 9 layers of the emotional field. But how did I kind of got onto that idea? Well, first and foremost, I kind of discovered it in my own meditation practice, in my own clearing work practice. As well as working with the different clients in healing work, but also because I actually had the support from the Bailey material, not what was written in there word by word, but what I kind of could extract from it on a higher order level, the words behind the words, the layers behind the layers, the information behind the information, that is neatly put. So that's kind of how I got that, and that supported my work. And that's what you said there. So my goal is, in whatever I'm doing, is kind of what needs to be broken down so we don't get into that rabbit hole and go back in time and actually work with the past spiritual teaching systems that are no longer applicable to who we are today. But they are important to know, because when we do past life work, if as I have had my Buddhist monk incarnation in 1959, it goes further back than that, and I recall some of these things, then it's good for me to actually know what are the Buddhist ideas about. But I've not studied it in detail as you have, gone into the whole Pali language and all. I wanted to, but I just had enough on my plate with Hebrew and what have you.
Well, if it's a Chinese lineage, then you have to know Chinese and the whole Chinese canon, which differs significantly at points in the Pali canon. So it's
yes. So what I do instead is that I link up to that. I call it a timeline. Past life is part of a timeline. So I go into that timeline and then I explore who was I at that point, and we can have another discussion on the I and who am I and is there even an I. I talked about that as well, and you have too. So concepts of self and self-identification, and what does that mean? But in each life, we kind of have a version of ourselves where we deal with certain perceptions of reality, and that leaves residuals that are also stored on the astral plane. So going back in time also means and clearing up who we have been, so we can center ourselves in the now and integrate presence, as you put there.
Ah, beautiful.
Because that is all that it is, that we align ourselves with who and what we are today, and are not stuck in the past and not stuck in what we think the future is, but understand that the now is the time to transform the past, so we can be observant in the now and then move into what kind of future would I then like to create. And if we were only the ones on the planet, then we could do that. But that's where the extraterrestrial agenda comes in and blocks us from doing that. And that's another part of my work. As I work through, yes, we are capable of doing this progression work where we work with consciousness and energy and in the original concepts of what we were as a highly advanced civilization. So why are we where we are now? What happened? What happened?
Very good point. I mean, just the glaring obvious thing, the Giza Pyramid, they can't recreate that today with today's technology.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there it is, right for anybody to see it. You know?
Yeah. Yes.
So, I mean, that's a really crude example, but yeah. Yep.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So now let's, well, not going into details of what this new video that I mentioned at the front, and I'll just give the title again here, and it's New Interdomain Races and New Intervention Protocol, and it's from this subscription service, or this update service, the Higher Order Systemic Energetic New Reality Challenges updates for 2023, and we'll give more information at the end on how folks can sign up for that. But without going into too much details of this, what would you say is there any kind of context you would like to give for this? Because it does involve, I'll just list some of the things that it involves here. It involves the end of the event protocol. It gives various levels of relative reality configuration. It goes into these extra systemic races. And you've also encountered new council technology and protocol, I would say. There's agreements on how the agreements that were made there on how this plays out in the greater reality. It involves wars and how there's some uncertainties around whether that will trickle into our everyday reality or not. So that's kind of a summary, but it's going to be hard for people to know exactly what all that means unless they listen to it themselves, right?
Yeah.
Is there any context you would give of those?
I would say it's good to put it there, because people will then experience this kind of, okay, she was just talking about the astral plane, the past and the present and what have we, and then it's whoa, a whole
now
new
we're
line of
not
words.
only in the present, but we're talking about things that are rapidly potentially unfolding here,
yes,
right? So,
but also with a complete new language, and people will feel that gap as like, oh wow, what happened there?
So how do we bridge that gap?
Well, first and foremost, that's why we work with when you really need to develop. That's where I become the psychotherapist, right? If you need to develop, you need to have a crisis. You need to have something that tells you, yeah, I'm actually not on top of this game. People delude themselves to think, oh yeah, I'm so on top of this one. But when they get this confrontation with me using a new language, it's like you have done the whole atom thing in primary school or first grade or however, you know the grade. What grade do you do in the States when you do this?
The atoms and the things? I would say anywhere maybe between first, third, and fifth. I'm not sure, depending on how good or bad the school is. I mean, or, how high level the school is. Right, exactly. And what country you're in, right?
Yes, Danish schooling system, because I come from Denmark. It's a very, 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 it's one of the highest level school systems in the world. Anyways, but
very good theology school too, by the way.
Yes,
so
yes. Anyway, so point being is that people will feel that there's something that they haven't acquainted themselves with. Here is a complete new level of information, because we have had the I call it extra-systemic. Why do I call it extra-systemic, not just extraterrestrial?
Yes.
Well, systemic alludes to the extrastellar races, whereas terrestrial alludes to little gray men that are living on other planets. So it's a misnomer, because there are no little gray men living on other planets. So there are no extraterrestrials. But you can also say the extraterrestrial comes from the understanding of they are extra to our terrestrial environment.
Yes.
So in that way, then it's right. But it's still, it's better to orient where do they actually come from than what they are to us.
Yes.
And that's again a shift of perspective, as in, I'm not the center of the universe here. Actually, I'm in the middle of a very big, complex structure where others are completely in charge, and I'm trying to upgrade myself, not me, but others are to ask that question. How do I get myself up to that level where I actually become a valid participant in what's going on our planet? Not just with the whole build-up of what is the Kardashev? Is that what is it called?
I was just thinking the same thing. So like a level 0 civilization,
Exactly.
a level 1 civilization.
Yeah,
Yes,
I think it's I'm sorry about that.
not Kardashian. No, that's the wrong celebrity right there.
We could go that too. Yeah, that's yeah. We're talking
I would love to see the Kardashians get into that though. But.
We're talking about the shoes. Sorry about that. Yeah. So not these type of civilizations, how to harness energy from the planet and these, because that's again oriented with the physics, as in how do you work with energy. But it does allude to that understanding that the extra-systemic or the races from other stellar systems and other reality fields, because when we look in the sky, we say, oh, that's the Orion system. That's technically a holographic overlay. It's not really there, and that's again where it becomes too mind-boggling.
And there's not a planet on the Orion where little gray men or green men are living that they come in a little flying saucer per se and visit us, and then that's the aliens. No, we don't mean that. No.
Well, there are grays that come in and craft. They're called jolts, but they're
not living on a planet like Earth.
No,
right?
exactly.
Yeah.
So, but they are able to manipulate our reality field. So that's why I call it the jolts, because they can both function within frequency spectrum as well as in the fourth dimension. So these are some of the sciences that we need to catch up with. And for that, we need a new language.
Yes.
And that's the point of me not just using what has been worked with within the UFO communities and all the others that have been out there laying the foundation for all of this, whether it was seeded in or a kind of a soft disclosure or whatever's been going on. All of the ones that build up here is kind of, we build up to this layer where we now have, in my opinion, I might be wrong, but when I look at whoever comes out, they're doing something new, they are not really doing something new. They're rebranding what's already there, using the same terminology, using the same concepts, using the same ideas. They might ask the questions a little bit differently, but because they use the same thought forms, then what they're asking will lead to the same conclusion.
Sure.
So they're not really going that next level. And for us to go to the next level, we need a new way of thinking. We need a new way of working with information, and we need new words.
Yes.
And that's enormously frustrating for people because, not only am I looking into all of these different levels of information, reality fields, dimensions, entities, what does that mean? Holographic network, gridwork, racial grids, and brown bag panic moment. Then also have to learn a new terminology.
Yes.
But these, when we talk about the extra-systemic races, the other races that are here, they are telepathic. They work with holographic information systems. They work with packages of information. And each word unfolds concepts upon concepts as patterns. So if we kind of go with, why do I call it a reality field instead of a solar system? Because a solar system belongs to generic sciences within human terminology. So that's that thought form. Reality field goes into holographic fields of radiation, vibration, and code systems that can work in different ways connected to different networks and unfold that level of science. So when I say reality field, what happens in my mind with the expanded awareness is that it goes into the complete zip file, unfolded all in one big program, and I see it all in one go. And the races that are here do the same thing. So when I communicate with some of these races, which of course is telepathic, I would love them to land on the street in a craft, and seriously, I mean that.
In physical eyes, right?
Yes, I have seen a very large craft when I was in Australia, so I have seen.
That,
and I have my share of experiences. I know that it's not made up. It cannot be made up what I've experienced. But when they do communicate, it is telepathic, and it's done via sentences that are packages of information that are kind of code streams, but it can be translated into English words or any other language, but preferably the English language. And by that, then it opens up this information system that I can look into.
And this is one thing that's coming to mind here is traditional science, even though this is the higher order science, and it would be nice to have science get to where this is that. But right now, if something's scientific, it has to have an instrument to measure it, right?
Yeah.
And so there's no known instruments that measure these things. So people would say, well, that's not scientific. But the thing is that what we call science, it obviously isn't at that level. I mean, I think that's might be worth pointing out here too. Another thing that comes to mind is people will want to know, well, how do you, step by step, how do I get to that level where I can do it myself?
Yeah.
You know, and you've mentioned some of this in your work too. It's just not a one size fits all formula for people to be able to do this, right? Yeah.
Yeah. With the whole, why do I use the word higher order sciences? Because that's again where I get really word nerdy here as a word nerd, as I kind of call it, because yes, that's what the takeaway from my theological studies at the Copenhagen University was that I learned the scientific method.
Yes.
So that's why I call it science, because we need to put things into boxes. We need to focus instead of looking at the whole. It's like forest for the trees. You can look at the forest and then, or the wood, I should say in America. You can look at the forest and you say, well, all of these trees are there, and then you look at it from a meta perspective. This is the forest.
Yes.
But you can also go into details of each tree where you begin to classify each tree. And that's what scientific method is. You have the unity of everything. You divide it into little specimens you can then begin to study. And then you deduce it. You go further and further into little bits and pieces.
Hypothesis,
yes,
testing.
But no, you literally go into more and more different, smaller pieces of what you're studying.
Yeah.
So you go from the meta level of the forest, you go into the individual tree, you go into what species is it, the generic, the phenotype, the genotype, you go and look, what is that?
Mycelium connecting it, the soil it's growing in.
The environment, that's technically the environment, that's the system it's part of. But you can also go into so let's do this one. You have the meter.
Bark, the hardwood.
Yes, you have the meter level. Then you have the system it's part of, which you referred to. Then you have the individual tree as the uniqueness of that individual tree. Then you go into the inside of the tree, where you then begin to work with the phyto DNA, the plant DNA, and then you can begin to decode that DNA, and then you go into the quantum fields, and onward and so forth. So that's the scientific method, where you literally learn to work in different boxes.
Yep.
On that spectrum from meter into the nitty-gritty detail.
Yes, macro to micro.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's why I call it the higher order sciences, because that's done the same way.
Yeah.
The difference is that here in our perception of reality, we do it in a linear manner. So we do it step by step. You need to know this, to know that, to know A to B to C to D, what have you. But the exosystemic races, since they're holographically oriented and they can manipulate energy in any ways and forms, for them it's code sequences. And all of these code sequences are behind their reality perception, which is like a zip file you unfold. It's like you download a whole program. You don't just do from step A to step B.
That's right. It can be recoded.
Yes. So the challenge is, how do you get your energy system back into being able to do that zip file unfolding? Not learning it linearly with your structural neural network, learning A to B to C, but actually go into that higher order state of mind, which you do in meditation and contemplation and energy work, where you clear out your fields so they begin to vibrate with reality itself. And then you align with reality itself. And that ignites your mental field to that higher level where you begin to connect to all of the inbuilt information systems that are everywhere.
And by the way, Randy has unique energy work, I would say. It's very hands-on, physical hands-on too. And that's included in the progression work courses as well. So it's very helpful too, because I know people want to know, how do I get there? How do I make this happen? And so not only does she have the progression work courses and the updates we talked about here, you also have a project called the Food, Health, and Environment. You have the Changemaker courses, right? Yeah. There's the Stargate courses, which that was maybe a little bit more of some of the things we're talking about, perhaps. You've got the Systemic Energetic Awareness Forum, or the C Forum at randygreen.one, and some group calls coming up. And this is just to name a few things. So I want to throw it back to you now to let people know where they should go to find all this and more, and then mention your YouTube channels and anything else you'd like to say too. Yeah.
Yes. Well, in that manner, I'm a little bit complicated person because I have got two websites. And I made it that way because the first website I created that is in Danish and is called directly translated two ways, as in kind of high and lower. And that's the whole academy today. And if people look up the whole academy by Randy Green, they will come to that website.
Find it and just dispel it for those only listening. TOVEJE.DK for Denmark.
Thank you. Yes. So, yes, exactly. And there I got the progression sciences. That's kind of one pillar where I take people by the hand with first giving them a lot of free material. So they can challenge themselves with that free material. That's where I got 3 YouTube channels. I got the Whole Academy YouTube channel. I got the C Forum YouTube channel, which used to be the Higher Awareness Lifestyle channel. And then I got the Changemaker channel, which is this current name by Randy Green. I will change that later on because I'm this difficult person.
And those will all be found on YouTube if you just search Randy Green, Randy with an I, and most of those will come up towards the top.
Yes. So the difficulty with my material is that it needs to be upgraded all the time, and thereby, because I am this word nerd that understands that each word connects to a thought form, when I shift the thought form, I have to shift the content of my channels as well as shift the title. So that's a little bit, but I've got links everywhere, and it is easy to find, especially if people just look up Randy Green or the Souls of Humanity or the Whole Academy. Yes. And Whole is the short for Higher Awareness Lifestyle. HAL. So that's put in there. So in the Whole Academy, I have where we take into the progression sciences, where people can begin with the free material that are out there. They can study my books. They are written from 2014 until 2020. They are contextual. They give the context. But what I'm working with right now, for instance, the Souls of Humanity and the Whole Understanding of Reality, that was my first book. And the alien races that are here, let's just call them the alien, because they are alien to our system. Or the extraterrestrial, or the exosystemic, or the LP of 2 that goes to the original construction of our world, different terminology. So building that one up gives the background information. But if people want to get a little bit more up to date, then they can add the book material with the perception logs. I've done 6 perception logs where I literally upgrade everything into where are we now. So the older material will then be upgraded in the perception logs, which can be found on the Whole Academy website. So they are tied together. And then in the progression sciences, you say, well, do I have to study the books before I go into the progression sciences? No, because the progression science, in the free material, I literally cover all the bases that are needed. I know it's a very large corpus, as it's called in Latin. It's a very large body, which is the Latin word for corpus. The corpus is Latin for body, of work that people need to go through. But I'm this kind of old school, right? I started the beta material with over 8,000 pages.
There you go.
So
yes,
kind of,
exactly.
that's how it goes. You want to know, you have to study. You want to know, you have to study. That's how it goes.
This is the academy too.
Yeah.
Right?
So there is no this quick fix. Give me just a short overview and I'm good to go. As I joke a little bit around it, this is not about the 101 for dummies. This is about the ones that want to make it a lifestyle. That want to know the answers, just to discover that they will never find the answers. So they will continue. So at some point, the studying will no longer be needed. But we do need frames of references from where we can work. And this is, my material is not meant as, here I teach you everything from A to Z. I am doing a lot of teaching, a lot of levels, which you know, because you have looked into my course material and know what it's about. So this is about me saying, no, I'm creating frames of references for you. So when you do your inner work, I'll teach you kind of, so you don't... How to put this? When I began, I didn't have frames of references. I had the old material, which I felt like I just wanted to vomit and throw it out because it was not adequate. It was not the right level of information. I felt right away, this is not what I need. And then I plowed my way through systems, and I ended up every single time feeling this is not for me, which actually goes back to an old dream I had to seek and find until I would find what no longer could be worded. So that was kind of the understanding, okay, what I will find will be something that's so unique that is not yet been put into word. But also when we go with the higher order sciences, at some point you can no longer verbalize them. You have to experience them. And then you will still be devoid of words, which is some of the things I talk about in that update, some of these new technologies, because we haven't got the language for it. Secondly, it's so advanced that we have no concepts for it either, and we have no understanding of how it actually works. So I can only explain the dynamics.
Yes. Can only kind of point and allude to it in language, right?
Yeah.
Not the same thing of what it actually is or the experience is,
Yes.
right?
Yes, so people can go first of the three materials, see if it's for them, but just bear in mind that both my books and the free material are older material, but they're foundational. They give the background, they give the foundation, and if people have the patience and the endurance to go through all of it, they will get a pretty good framework. And the reason why I've done it that way is because I know there are people out there that cannot afford this material as it is right now. So there's the non-payment part, but of course it's a little bit outdated, and then there's the payment part where people pay, but that would be the newest level of information. So the progression sciences go into the whole transition of our energy system into the new configuration our reality field is changing into. And that has been alluded to in the Age of Aquarius. How are we on time schedule here?
50 minutes.
50 minutes. Okay, so perhaps we should actually do a follow-up just to kind of into this, but I will shorten it down as much as I can. So there are the transition sciences, the clearing work, what is needed to get to the point where people will understand these are the new dynamics of doing inner work. This is the new way of working with consciousness that will build the bridge to the new sciences of the future, to the humanities that are in the future already, that we will grow into becoming so we can connect the future and who we are now and get rid of the past. So that's the progression sciences. The change maker is all about working on a double level with where we actually put our energy system into work inside this reality to transform this reality, which is just the baby steps. And then the 2025 timeline work, that's bridging to the future. And that's where the heavy sciences will come up eventually. And I think that will only be for a small portion of humans that will find that interesting, right? That will really go sciencey, nerdy, higher order level.
We'll
really.
See, right? Yeah.
Yes. Then the other website, randygreen.one, where I got the higher order systemic, extra-systemic, energetic awareness forum. I know it's a long word, saying that again.
C-form, SEA.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Yes.
So there I'm only working with what we call the extra-systemic or the exopolitics and the new governmental issues, but I'm also work with past lives and how to clear past lives in a more psychological context. And you will say, what does that have to do with the extra-systemic races?
Yeah, what does that have to do with the extra-systemic races?
Because that goes into the understanding of how they have been working with us in our past lives. I have barely begun that work, but it ties in. But it also ties into the progression sciences. So they are connected, these two websites.
That's wild, because most people, when they think of past lives, they don't consider that, right? And so it's a whole new area for explorate. Easy for me to say.
Exploration, yes.
Thank you.
So in my book, Understanding the Old Stellar Souls, I work with timelines, but that's our, what we call the systemic stellar level of our awareness potentials. But when we talk about past lives, that's where because why is that important? It is important because our reality field on what we call density 1 or the outer domain or matter-oriented, you and me, both reality field, 3 lower field, biofield, emotional field, mental field, that is being reconfigured. Whereas when we did the stellar activation cycle, it was on the stellar level, the density 2 level, the systemic level. So that meant there was only the energy system. And there our past lives didn't matter. But they matter now because we're now going into matter. We're going into who we are in this physical form. And that's the pole, that's the new reality we're going towards. And to sum that up and tie it to the update, we have had different councils on our planet or in our solar system, our reality field. They have shifted. It's been a hub of different races coming and going. And now we got another new group coming in, and they have absolutely got some very, very different approaches to what's going to happen here. And most people would say, is that for good? Is that ascension? And that's where I say, well, perhaps we should come up with some new terminology, because what is benevolent, what is not benevolent, what is ascension and what is not ascension. So let us just say that this will be the opportunity for humanity to get themselves schooled and educated into the higher order sciences, where we might be able to sit around the table in the councils and decide what's going to happen with our solar system. Because that's the political level that we should grow into, not just we barely know how to work with ourselves, let alone how to take care of our planet. But the races that are coming in are from what we call the inner domain of the galactic level. They will demand of us that we also know how to take care of our solar system.
And I hear various speakers and teachers talk about, yes, we want to get up to the level where we can do this, but see, they don't really offer many details on how that will unfold or what that's like. And that's where your work comes in.
Exactly.
That's
what all of my work is about. Get rid of the old stuff that doesn't take us anywhere. Get into both where we can bridge the scientific method, the psychological method, because I am a psychotherapist, the healing method, the clairvoyant method, and push it out of the astral plane, push it out of the mental plane, and get from local to global to systemic to the entire galactic sphere that we are supposedly be knowledgeable of and actually be able to work with in our inner perception and contemplation dynamics.
Well, beautiful, cool. I appreciate sitting down and taking the time to do this. It's been a long time coming, and it's been a joy and a pleasure, and very insightful and helpful. And all I can do is encourage people to check out Randy's work and dive into it.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.